Welcome back to Big Mike Sports, Atlanta born, Carolina raised, Detroit driven. I'm your host, as always,
The one
Big
and only.
Mike.
I'm back.
And we'll get to the Lions recap against the Saints in just a second. But first, we want to get to the hot topic discussion of the day, and that is the college football playoff selection. 4 teams getting the right to play for the FBS College Football National Championship, but it's not exactly who you may have expected. Seminole fans up in arms after the undefeated ACC champion Florida State Seminoles were left out of the top 4 despite their victory over Louisville. But this is a decision that I do agree with, because when you look at Florida State's resume, of course, yeah, we know that they're undefeated. We've heard all that. ACC conference champion. We've heard some of the naysayers say that, of course, their quarterback went down, so nobody really wanted to see them get in there. But my argument is totally separate. I just look at the resume, and I think that the other playoff teams that did get in just had better wins than Florida State did. I mean, you look at Florida State, and your best win is number 5 LSU the first week of the season. That LSU team ended up winning 9 games on the year, and not quite up to the championship caliber that everybody thought they would be. Other than that, you look at some of their other wins. You got Duke, who ended up with 7 wins, although they were ranked 16th at the time. Louisville, of course, who they beat in the conference championship. A tough team, good defense, but not quite up to the caliber of some of the other opponents that some of the other teams have faced. And then you're looking at your other best win being at Clemson, which they only won by 1 possession. Maybe if in some of these games they, maybe you blow out Clemson a little more. I don't know. It just doesn't look very good when you stack it up against some of the other teams. Let's look at some of the other teams that the other playoff teams ended up beating. Yeah, Michigan, of course, beat number 2 Ohio State in a basically playoff play-in game. But then they also won at number 10 Penn State, top 10 finalist in the final college football playoff rankings, which is going to be an important point here as we go through. Washington, who of course beat Oregon twice on the year, and also a little win at Oregon State and a win against Utah. Oregon, another one of those teams that finished top 10 in the college football playoff final rankings. Texas, of course, as we all know, defeated Alabama all the way back in week 2. Now, I don't think that beating Alabama week 2 is exactly the same as, let's say, beating them right now, because the Alabama team that started the season is definitely not the same team that we're looking at right now that ended up beating Georgia. So I kind of take that victory by Texas with a grain of salt. I mean, of course, props to them for going into Alabama and beating them like that. But I don't think it's as great of a win as everybody's made it out to be. Of course, everybody's making the whole head-to-head argument, saying that Texas beat Alabama. Of course, they need to be in. But if we're using the whole head-to-head argument, Texas lost to Oklahoma. And you're not trying to put Oklahoma in the playoff right now with their 8 wins. And so, yeah, I personally would have put in Georgia ahead of Texas, because Georgia, their only loss being to Alabama, they still had some pretty good wins, beating Ole Miss, Missouri, and Tennessee. Missouri's one of those teams that also ended up in the final top 10 rankings for the college football playoff. And Ole Miss is right in there at number 11. So I think that those are more quality wins overall, the whole body of work, than Texas had. Because all Texas did was, okay, you beat Kansas, you beat Kansas State, you beat Oklahoma State. Those teams aren't the cream of the crop. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, I would have put in Georgia ahead of Texas, but Alabama definitely deserved to be in with that win over Georgia. Probably the best win of any team on the season, because Georgia was number 1 for such a long time, except for maybe that 1 week where Ohio State was number 1 for a little while. But they've been the unanimous perennial number 1 team. Alabama went in there and beat them. Now you can of course make the argument that the Bulldogs beat themselves, which they certainly did. They certainly did not look very good in that game. But you still got to give props to Alabama for finding a way to beat Auburn there, and then coming off of that and being able to beat Georgia also, which, in the SEC championship, Bama definitely has the advantage over Georgia in recent years. But, when you compare the resumes of all 5 of these teams and compared to Florida State, they just don't stack up. You could compare Florida State with maybe Texas, and say that Florida State might have a few more quality wins than Texas does, but Texas got in just off the back of that win against Alabama all the way at the beginning of the year. So this ranking is definitely not the one that I would have used. Like I said, I would have put Georgia ahead of Texas, but you can't be too upset. Of course, a lot of Florida State fans are all up in their feelings after this one because they say, oh, we were undefeated, we were a conference champion, go ahead and crown us. Well, you didn't face the same level of competition as all these other teams, and it's just, of course, you could say that Florida State went undefeated and all these teams lost the game, but all the teams that these teams lost to were really good competition, except maybe Texas with that loss to Oklahoma. But Oklahoma's still a decent team nonetheless. Florida State, I guess he kind of got unlucky with LSU not turning out to do very well. They definitely needed LSU to do a little bit more to make that win look a little better. But yeah, just unlucky for Florida State. But with all Florida State fans, crying foul, there's a reason that they didn't get in. Besides the whole quarterback thing, besides everything else, just the quality of wins did not stack up. We're picking Michigan to win it this year. Michigan with that number one defense in the country, scoring defense. Really interested to see what that Washington Texas game will end up doing, because Texas has a good defense and a pretty good offense as well. Washington's defense not very good, but dynamic, electric offense led by Heisman hopeful Michael Penix, who I've liked ever since he was at Indiana. Thought he was an exciting player back there when he was throwing to guys of the likes of Whop Phillier, all-time college football name there. If you don't know, now you know. Look it up. But yeah, it's still going to be an exciting playoff, even with this controversy. This might have been the most controversial college football playoff thing, unveilment of perhaps all time. I don't know. I don't exactly have the stats to back that up off the top of my head right now, but leaving out an undefeated Florida State ACC champion and leaving out one-loss Georgia after just a loss in the SEC championship seemed like a little bit of an overcorrection to me, but yeah, still excited to see how this one plays out.
You're not just wrong, you're stupid.
The Lions defeated the Saints 33-28 in New Orleans on Sunday, and while you always like to celebrate a win anytime, this was definitely one that could have gone a little better. The Lions, of course, got off to a 21-0 lead very early in the first quarter. It was all Lions, just not even halfway through the first quarter. It was already 21-0 as Montgomery ran in for a 2-yard run to cap off a pretty long opening drive with a touchdown. And then Derek Carr on his very first pass attempt, that was an interception that pushed Detroit straight into the red zone. Laporta caught a pass from Goff to catch that one in, and then another pass from Goff not too long after to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Found the end zone once again. And after that, the Lions offense kind of sputtered out a little bit, and the Saints offense was able to get going with a start. Touchdown to Jimmy Graham on a little miscommunication between the linebacker and safety, Tracy Walker. The Lions were able to cash in a little field goal at halftime, or right before halftime, to make it 24-7 going into the half. And then the Saints came back a little bit. The Lions defense, which plays well in certain situations, kind of a streaky unit. They, of course, did get that turnover to start the game, but then they sort of got figured out a little bit by the Saints, I guess. I don't know if it was just the Saints getting their offense primed up finally, or if the defense was having some lapses, or maybe a little bit of both. But the Saints still have some weapons on offense, whether it's Kamara, whether it's Chris Olave, who caught 5 passes for 113 yards. I'm pretty sure. Luckily, the Lions were able to keep him out of the end zone, although he did set up a couple of red zone opportunities for them that they did cash in. Last week, the Saints went 0-5 in the red zone as the 28th ranked red zone offense in the league. But this game, they went 4-for-4, cashing in 4 touchdowns when they got there. Now, of course, any team's going to rebound from a pit of despair like 0-5 in the red zone would do to a team. But yeah, still not a good sign for the Lions' red zone defense, which is not the best by any stretch of the imagination. But it looked like the Lions were going to pull away late as they got a field goal as time expired in the third quarter, and then followed that up with a touchdown pretty soon after on the reverse to Jameson Williams. And the failed 2 point conversion made it 33-21. And then on that drive, right after Derek Carr got injured after a pretty nasty hit, and it looked like the game was going to be over for the Saints, but Jameis came in and rallied the team. And Taysom Hill, he got a few carries. He was kind of, when the Saints offense wasn't able to do anything, Taysom Hill came into the game and he was able to get a nice gain on the run, and then the offense got going again. So big credit to Taysom Hill in this one. And also Jameis Winston, Freudian slip there, was able to rally the troops there and make it interesting when they got down to get a score to Kamara to make it 33-28. And then the Saints did have the ball again to try and take the lead, but they went for it on fourth down at the Detroit 40 and was not able to get it. And then the game wasn't quite over because Goff and the Lions offense did have to get a first down, which they did on a really crazy pass to Josh Reynolds where Goff was under a whole lot of pressure. He was somehow able to get the ball back, and incredibly accurately, I might say, as well, to Josh Reynolds to get that first down and ice the game for the Lions. So you definitely like a hot start for your team on offense, but you definitely have to keep it going. The offense did kind of disappear after that 21-0 run there. Of course, the Saints defense got its feet underneath them finally after that, crazy run to start the game, which, it's going to happen, but you still got to keep the gas pedal on. You still got to possess the ball for a little longer. Basically, the 2 turnovers really made the difference for the Lions here because, once again, they were not able to own time of possession. The Saints had a minor edge there, 32 minutes for the Saints compared to just under 28 for the Lions. And the Saints actually did outgain them and get more first downs than they did in this game. But those turnovers, when you can get them, especially when you're a defense that isn't the greatest at stopping your opponent from scoring, I guess, you really like the takeaways, especially when you're giving them to an offense of this caliber. Detroit continues to just keep being able to outscore its opponents. You definitely do prefer the hot start here compared to how the Lions have been starting the past couple of games. Perhaps the difference in this game was just the fact that the Lions got the ball first and were able to score first, as opposed their opponents getting the ball first and scoring on their first possessions in the past couple of games. So, interesting trend there. You definitely want your defense to show up at the beginning of the game a little bit more, especially on that kind of first drive. That really sets the tone for the game. So, nothing, perfect for the Lions, but they keep trying to find a way to win, and that is what good teams do in the end. Still got time for the defense to kind of get things under control. I've been chalking a lot of it up to just like rookies and young guys kind of getting in, especially Jack Campbell, especially in coverage. Now, Jack Campbell can definitely find the ball and get some tackles. He led the team in tackles in this game, his first starting in place of the injured Alex Anzalone. So, and then plus there was that confusion between the linebacker. I'm not sure if it was Campbell. It might have been. And the safety Tracy Walker on that touchdown to Jimmy Graham, where Tracy Walker just kind of like went over to sort of pick him up, but then I think he was supposed to just be covering that edge of the field, and so he was trying to pass it off to the linebacker as Jimmy Graham kind of cut more towards the middle, but both of them just kind of didn't really work it out, so Graham ended up being wide open between the two guys. But like the coaching staff has said all season, they watch all the mistakes on the tape and they are very active in trying to correct these things. So it's always going to be a learning experience for the young guys on defense. Detroit's still a very young team. We got all these really high draft picks out there who've been playing really well, but we got to remember that they are still rookies and they will make some mistakes sometimes. Some lapses in coverage. Brian Branch was one who, not the worst in coverage, definitely, but there were a couple plays where he kind of, left a guy open. I think it was just, a little rookie mistake, nothing too crazy to think of. But, the defense's performance against some of the upcoming opponents is really going to show us what this team is going to be all about. At the Bears next week, at home against the Broncos, at Vikings, at Cowboys, and then back at home against the Vikings to end the season in a game that could have divisional implications. We'll have to see how it goes. The Lions got really lucky that the Bears were able to beat the Vikings when they did. Yeah, at the Bears, that'll still be a very tough game. I think when they traveled to play the Bears in Chicago last year, it was that 31-30 game. So the Bears are definitely going to give them their best shot. So that's something that we got to make sure that we're very focused and prepared for, because that game's a must-win game. Like, if we're going to make some noise in the playoffs, you have to win that game. Back home against the Broncos, I know the Broncos have been a hot team, but they showed some weakness, in their last game there against the Texans. They were not quite able to get back into that one. Definitely need to win that one. I think that Denver is an inferior team to the Lions, despite the kind of hot run that they have gone on as of late. Then at the Vikings, you want to win all of these games, obviously. But at the Vikings, I would kind of understand if they lost that one. That one might be like a 50-50. At the Cowboys, they're probably going to lose that game. I just hope that it's close and competitive, and maybe, the Lions could steal a win at the end, but I'd give them maybe a 30 or 40% chance of winning that game at Dallas. I mean, there have been some times in the past where some not as good Lions teams went into Dallas and made it a close one, like back when Golden Tate was still playing. So maybe that'll change this time. Of course, the Cowboys have shown themselves to be kind of vulnerable sometimes in kind of odd situations. Of course, they did lose to the Cardinals there back earlier in the season, but they're just kind of a weird team because they have such a good point differential, yet they have those like 3 or 4 losses, which is kind of strange. So, you can't underestimate the Cowboys' ability to kind of flub it up. But then again, the Lions can do the same thing. So, we'll see. And then at home against the Vikings, that's one that they definitely need to win. If you end up losing at the Vikings and at the Cowboys, you have to win at home against the Vikings. That's going to be kind of a playoff primer. You definitely want to carry some momentum in the playoffs. We cannot have, them losing the last 3 games of the season and going into the playoffs and thinking that they're going to win. It's just not a good look for you. Now, there was that one Lions team that went 9-4 at this point in the season. It was either 16 or 17, but then Stafford ended up injuring his hand, and they lost the final 3 games of the season. And yeah, either they missed the playoffs or they just kind of limped into a wild card spot. I can't remember exactly which season it was, but we can't have a repeat of something like that where they lose out the final 3 games of the season and stumble into the playoffs if they even make it at all. So those first 2 games, you definitely have to win those. If not, things are going to look really, really dicey as we get into some of these crunch time games here in those final 3 games of the year. So very important stretch coming up for the Lions. We're going to see exactly what kind of team they are. We're going to see exactly what they're going to do in the playoffs. And and it's an exciting time. Now, of course, if the team that showed up in the first quarter of this game can play a whole entire game that way, then the Lions, are definitely Super Bowl contenders, as we kind of want to believe that they are. But if not this season, it will definitely come soon. This team has been built to contend for a long time by GM Brad Holmes. So, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, they'll come out strong and whip up on these first 2 teams so that they can look good in the final 3 games. So, looking to make some noise in the playoffs. This is going to be the big test.